Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an NPC bodybuilder. Today's guest is Josh Ponton. Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Quentin. Excited for this one.
For sure, my man. So Josh, the first question I kind of like to kickstart each conversation off with is asking all my guests, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
Man, this is a good question. So I'm a newbie to bodybuilding, right? So it's probably we're just approaching the 2-year mark of actually being into it. But if I have to pick kind of two things, like the first one I would say is like from a physique standpoint, definitely a Phil Heath, right? So just from like an all out, just physique, how things flow, he can really, the fullness he was able to bring with the conditioning, right? All that stuff there, like that to me is like one of my favorite physiques. Now from a personality standpoint, kind of what he's done in the industry, I love Jay Cutler. Kind of love watching his interviews, his podcasts, how his mindset works. Obviously phenomenal physique too, right? What 4-time Mr. Olympia winner. So obviously he has that, going from two, but I just think from like a work ethic, a business standpoint, like there's a lot to learn from Jay Cutler.
Very cool. Are there any guys currently in the IFBB that you kind of look up to or respect their physiques?
Yeah, so a big one, and I've actually been blessed to be able to actually get to personally know him, right, and call him a friend. It's Hunter Labrada. So he's probably one of the first, bodybuilders that I was able to kind of see in person, stand next to, right, those type of things over here at Destination Dallas. Got introduced to him by a friend, a good, my training partner actually is best friends with him and his wife. And so, I love kind of his style, his work ethic, his mindset. He's just a great guy all around. So he's definitely one of my favorite physiques. That's probably top 5 in Olympia. I think Nick Walker has an amazing physique from a freak standpoint. But, I have to say Hunter's one of those people.
Yeah. Awesome, man. So at what age did you start lifting weights, Josh? And then why did you start lifting weights at that specific age?
Yeah. So I actually started, I guess this would be middle school. I had a buddy who was he was like he was born a meathead, man. This guy was playing metal music, doing guitar stuff, and he had a whole setup in his garage that I got him with the bench press and all that stuff back then. And so we had started football together. I guess so it would be freshman year, not middle school. So freshman year we started football together. We started just training in his garage, and so for me that's kind of where it really started with like weightlifting. And then I was just always the athlete where it's like I had more fun on the training side of things than I did actually in the sport. So especially like football, when we have off-season training, when we'd come for the 2-a-days, my favorite part was not necessarily the practice, it was the workout in the morning. So, started pretty early, and that kind of led into moving over here to Texas from Illinois. And that's where I actually started powerlifting that would be my junior year of high school.
Okay, awesome. So why don't you talk to us a little bit more, Josh, about your upbringing? You just mentioned growing up in Illinois. What was kind of life like for you? What sports did you play besides football? Kind of paint that picture up to about high school, and then we'll transition on from there.
Yeah, definitely, man. I was definitely blessed with a really solid family. And so, we grew up in inner city Chicago. I say grew up, but we moved around middle school out of that area. And, it was definitely inner city Chicago is inner city Chicago, right? It's rough. I remember we had our, back of our house blown up by someone because my parents reported them for selling drugs in the corner, right? And so it was like, you're kind of in that environment. But I was very blessed because of the type of parents I had, where I got to see them hustle their way out of that. And so from there, when I kind of got into elementary school, later to middle school, that's where we moved to the suburbs in Illinois. And then kind of grew up there until sophomore year of high school. And then from there moved over to Dallas, Texas. So for me, I was always, and I think it was because of like going from inner city Chicago to kind of, so you go from a place where it's like all racially, just like, it's one thing, and then you move to this cornfield town where it's like, you're one of, 2 African-Americans there. So it's like, I always was kind of trying to find out who I was. And for me, that kind of led to a lot of acting out, right? Being the class clown, being the guy who got suspended for getting into fights, and just, I was always able to get really good grades, be an honor student, but always got into trouble growing up. So I think that was kind of my way of like just kind of lashing out, trying to find out who I was and things like that. So it's like, so my upbringing was definitely one where, you know, very blessed with the family that I had, but definitely didn't do myself any service with making it easy as far as like getting in trouble and things like that.
Talk about the sports that you played growing up.
Yeah. So for me, contact sports were my favorite. So wrestling, football, those were the two that I kind of stuck with, and then fell in love with powerlifting once I moved to Texas. I didn't even know powerlifting was a thing until I moved to Texas.
Okay. Now I want to ask you this, and hopefully you don't mind. You know, you brought up the fact that you grew up in inner city Chicago, and then, you know, later elementary, middle school, you moved into the suburbs, and you said you were like one of two you know, African Americans at your new school. Now, was racism or you know, people saying things to you because of your color, was that something that was a part of your upbringing once you moved out of the inner city? If so, how did you kind of deal with that? If you don't mind touching on that.
Yeah, dude, that's a great question. And I think it's definitely something, I think that's where I had definitely some behavioral problems, because, you know, it wasn't necessarily, I would say, racism as much as it was of people just expecting you to be a certain way because of where you come from, right? And then you also expecting like, okay, well, I have to act that way, right, to live up these expectations. And so I remember just going through like different phases, right? You know, I went through one phase where it was like, fine, I'm going to, you know, dress hood and, you know, listen to the rap music and all of that stuff. And then another phase where it's like complete opposite. So, you know, definitely dealt with it. Not from like an extreme standpoint where, you know, you had, you know, people, you know, calling you the N-word or things like that, but more so from like kind of growing up in a generation where it's just like, it was a big joke, right? You know, like people would make jokes and stuff like that. And so that's kind of made it hard to deal with. And I think that's kind of what led to kind of having a really hard time figuring out like, okay, who am I? Who do I fit into? What group do I hang out with? Those were things that I definitely struggled with, because it was also came from both ways too, right? So for example, you know, I'm always a nerd at heart. So, you know, not only, you know, did I, you know, kind of try and be the cool kid and get in trouble and things like that, but I was also like in chess club in middle school, right? And so it wouldn't even just be like, okay, I'd get crap from, you know, the white kids in school. It would also be like I get crap from the black kids in school because I'm over here at chess club with the white kids, right? So it's like you kind of get it at both angles. And so I remember just growing up with that and just, you know, being confused of like, okay, well then who the hell am I supposed to be? Like, how am I supposed to act?
So one more question, kind of following up with that. Now, you know, when you move to the new school and you're one of two African Americans, do you feel like in the long run now as an adult and you know, being a grown man, having your own family, do you feel like that exposure of, you know, growing up in inner city and then growing up you know, as a minority, mostly around white people, do you feel like those experiences actually in the long run have helped you maybe to better relate to people and have helped develop you into maybe a more well-rounded individual, or maybe not?
No, I definitely do. And it's like, and I know we haven't really gotten to like adulthood and kind of what I did, you know, after, you know, school and stuff like that. But it's like, for me, I have found that it has really helped me out in things like business, sales, with empathy, right? Because it's like when you're in a lot of different environments and you're around different cultures, you know, growing up, my best friend was Muslim, right? For example, and you can imagine how that was for him too at that school, especially like going through like 2011 and things like that. And so it's just like being exposed to a lot of different cultures, I think has really helped me out with what I just, you know, empathy, right? Empathy of like, hey, you can't just look at someone in the current situation that they're in and just like blame that person all the time, right? You have to kind of realize, say, what path have they walked? Where do they grow up at? What school do they go to? You know, how are their parents, right? It's like all those things play a role in our environment. And, you know, it doesn't excuse people for their actions, right? But it definitely can have you have a level of understanding, and then you don't take things that personal, right? And I think that's actually one of the biggest things that dealing with a little bit of racism has helped me out with a lot, which sounds weird, but for example, it's like, I don't take it personal, right? You know, like I've had girlfriends' dads before where they're like, you're not going to date this guy because he's black. But it's like, and I would get so mad, but then now it's just like, no, it's just how that guy was raised. It's not his fault. Like that's just his upbringing and stuff like that. And, you know, then you can pray for him and things like that. But, you know, I think that's a great question. It definitely has helped me out with empathy.
Excellent, man. Okay. So, what were you kind of thinking about in terms of career, job, or what you wanted to do with your life while you were in high school? And then once you graduated high school, Josh, did life kind of take you in that direction? Did you go in a different direction? What did life look like post high school, kind of in those immediate years?
Yeah. So like I said, I got in trouble a lot, but I was always still that person that can definitely just excel at school. So I was definitely really good at, honor student, things like that. And I always saw myself being a lawyer. Actually wanted to go to law school, do corporate law. I kind of felt like that was going to be my calling. But then towards the end of high school, my senior year, I actually started getting into a little bit more into the fitness side of things, right? I had injured myself in football, had to get rotator cuff surgery. So it set me back there and I was like, okay, I'm not going to play sports in college. What else can I get interested in? And I got really interested in the just fitness, right? In general, like more personal training type things. And so from there, I went off back to Illinois, actually to a small private school called Aurora University for a business degree. And so, because I was still thinking like, something with business law, like that's what I'm going to go for. So I'll get my business degree now. And while there, I was just dead broke. So, you know how it goes, man. You're like going off to college, you took out student loans. And so I'm just dead broke trying to figure out, okay, cool, I have to pay my rent. Got to come up with beer money for the weekend, all that stuff there. And so I was like, I'm going to start, training people. I'll start writing programs. I got a crew of people that are working out with me anyway. So I'll start doing stuff like that. And so, you fall down the rabbit hole, you find bodybuilding.com and you just start, just researching your ass off. And then next, I ended up actually getting my NASM certification and then started personal training to pay the bills. And that kind of is where this whole journey of just fitness, I fell in love with it. So spent 2 years there, decided, hey, I'm going to switch over to kinesiology. Because this is what I love. I kind of thinking, I want to be a strength conditioning coach or something like that. And so I moved back to Texas to go to University of North Texas for kinesiology, started doing that, but the business side kept creeping back up as well. And so next, I'm still personal training, still doing really good there, training at 24-hour fitness. And the cool thing about personal training is you get surrounded with a lot of personal development, right? Like you get surrounded by other trainers, people who are consuming podcasts, just stuff that I never grew up with, right? And so this was the first time ever hearing people talk about businesses, doing independent training, making their own money, right? All that stuff. And it just became so interesting for me. And so next thing you know, I'm at this conference called Fitness Business Summit. This is my senior year of college. And I go there and I actually get caught up on stage because anyone who has a question for me, come run up on stage and ask this question. And so I ran up on stage, like, this guy's built, this is actually the owner, for the guy who owns, he's the franchise owner of F45s. Not F45, I'm sorry, Fit Body Bootcamp, Bedros Keuilian.
Bedros, right?
Yeah, Bedros Keuilian. Yeah. So he started Fit Body Bootcamp. So I remember being up on stage where I was like, dude, so I'm independent training right now. I want to own a gym one day. I don't know how to do it. And he was like, here's what you're going to do. Go to a park. You're going to run a Facebook ad. You're going to offer people a 6-week challenge there in the park, get them to join, get like 30 people there, do an outdoor boot camp, and then get them the pre-sale membership to get you in the location. So I was like, oh, it's like, this is how you can do it. So I did it. I did everything he said. And then next thing you know, I'm actually dropping out of college with a semester left to move into the gym that we opened up back in 2000. I guess that would be 2000, either 14, 15, something like that. And so, yeah, man. So it was a long journey, kind of went from thinking I'm going to be a lawyer or something in business to then becoming a personal trainer, then doing independent training, and then getting into a little 3,500 square foot location here in Plano, Texas, where I opened up my first business, which is called Renegade Boot Camps.
Wow, that's cool. We got some stuff to unpack there. So now I guess what I want to ask you is, I've read Bedros's book and I've listened to his podcast and him on other people's podcasts. So I'm very familiar with him. Definitely a very passionate, fiery individual and been very successful. Now, I guess what I want to ask you, Josh, is you said you dropped out of college during your senior year. Walk us through that process a little bit, because to go for 3.5 years or almost 4 years of college and then drop out. I mean, was this something that was something you were kind of already contemplating, or what was it beyond just, I'm going to go try to start this boot camp or whatever in a park, or was it simply that?
Yeah, I think someone I've heard before say, like, you have to be kind of crazy to love bodybuilding, right? Because it's everything, right? It's 24/7. You got to be a little bit obsessive, compulsive, right? Things like that. And that's definitely my personality when I latch onto something. So after that, I joined Bedros' mastermind. I gave him my last rent dollar to join his mastermind. And once I kind of got into that world, it was just like, this is it. I'm putting all my eggs in this basket. I'm going to focus everything on this, and we're going to make this work. And so I just couldn't, in my head, it was like, I couldn't justify driving back and forth like a whole semester. That would have been, because Denton from where I was living was about like an hour away. So it's like, just all of those things. I was like, I can start now and I can take advantage of this opportunity. And if it doesn't work out, cool, I'll go back to school. UNT is not going anywhere, right? It's going to be there. Right. So for me, and I'm not sure if this is great advice for everyone, but for me, I was just like, if I'm going to make this work, I want to make it work. And if I'm going to make it work, I know it's going to take time, sacrifice, things like that. And I did. And it was hard, man. There was a period. I know you know who Bedros Keuilian is. I'm not sure if you know who Alex Hormozi is.
Oh yeah, of course. I before I bought my gym, I read his book, and it helped me out a lot. So
okay, good. So I work for his company. He founded Gym Launch as a consultant now, and so bringing that up, like, is, there was a point where I was a year and a half in sleeping in my damn gym, and so it was like, there was definitely always, it wasn't like I was like, man, I'm so glad I dropped out of college. This was the right move. It definitely took a few years to like get to the point where I was like, okay, I made the right decision. But I brought up Alex there because it was about a year and a half in, and that's where I actually hired him and started working with him. And when he first started his company, him and his wife, and I learned so much from them, and that kind of changed a lot of things for me.
Man, there's some levels to this conversation. I like it, Josh. It's good. Now, before we kind of continue talking a little bit about business, now you said that you've only been bodybuilding for like 2 years. So during this, I'll just call it fitness adventure that you were on. I mean, what type of fitness were you doing at this time? Were you doing the powerlifting, and was that your sole focus in training? What were you doing for your own physical fitness?
Yeah, I think this is where, a lot of people, they like look at my progress in the last 2 years and they're just like, oh, a genetic freak, right? And things like that. Cause I've gone from 185 pounds, got up to 270 pounds in about a year and a half with Luke. And then we're getting done. We're about 10 days out now from the Texas Cup. So about to do our first show here, and we're going to step on stage at like 240. But I think a lot of that, like the foundation for these last 2 years, was built during that whole fitness phase, right? And I went through different phases. I went through a powerlifting phase. I went through a CrossFit phase, a phase where it was all about mobility and performance and things like that. But it's like, because I wasn't just going through those phases as like just a fitness enthusiast as well, I was also going through them as a coach. It really helped me learn a lot about different modalities, different training styles, Westside Barbell, Louis Simmons versus someone else, right? So it just helped me learn a lot of different training styles and applications, and learn my body as well, right? Especially from like a fitness and, movement, nutrition standpoint. And I think all of that has kind of compounded and been able to carry over in the last 2 years of bodybuilding.
Okay. Now, let's continue. I want to kind of finish up business talk, so then we can kind of transition into some bodybuilding talk here. Okay. So you joined Bedros's mastermind, and then you open up this gym. Now, what type of a gym was this? And walk us through kind of the steps of you opening up this gym. I mean, and I'm going to be straight up with you and ask, like, where did you get the money, to do it? Because that's the thing that I always come back to on the podcast when I'm chatting with people. Is like, and I say this all the time, but it's very true. People are like, oh, I like to lift the weights, so I'm going to open a gym. I like to drink beer, I'm going to open up a bar. I like to work on cars, I'm going to open up an auto mechanic, shop or something. And I think that's a starting point. But until you actually move in that direction and follow through with opening a business or buying a business that you think you might like or be passionate about, like you just don't know, just like anything else in life. And there's so much more to running a gym or running a bar than liking to drink or liking to lift weights. Like, you have to think about the business side of things. There's money, there's the bills, there's the members, like there's so much. So walk us through, how did you get the money? Walk us through opening the gym, walk us through living in the gym for the year and a half you did. Cause I want you to kind of paint the picture of the reality of what actually it takes to be an entrepreneur, to start from ground zero, because we see all the highlight reels on Instagram. That's why I'm passionate about this podcast, is because I love bringing on the bodybuilders and the coaches, because I want to get behind the muscle, right? We see you guys flexing. We see all the results, all the trophies, all the cars and the pretty girls and stuff on Instagram. That's just a small little snippet. And most of the time, that's not even reality for a lot of people on Instagram, right? So give us behind the scenes of the starting of your first business, Josh, please.
And so much to unpack here. So the first thing I want to say, because you just hit it on the head, is if you think that you can just take your hobby that you like to do, and because you like to do it, it means you should open up a business around that. That's probably what you see happen most in the fitness space, because the barrier of entry into, opening up a gym or something like that is a lot less than starting like a tech business or something like that, right? Where there's a lot of capital to start up. So you'll see a lot of trainers, like for example, I was just on a consulting call with 4 trainers for LA Fitness. They just left their jobs there to go open up a gym. But really what all they're doing is just giving themselves a glorified job with handcuffs, with a lot more overhead now because of everything else, right? And so those were some of the things I had to learn along the way. But to kind of paint you from the beginning to kind of where we ended up at is, I took that advice from Bedros and I was like, okay, cool. So independent training is not a business, is what I started to realize. I was like, me driving around the people's houses, them paying me to coach them. Like, yes, I don't have a boss, but I also don't have a business right now, right? Like, I have a contracted job, right? That's pretty much what I have. And so, yes, I can make decent money doing this, but it's like, do I want to do this for the rest of my life, or do I want to build something more? And that's kind of the question I had to ask myself. And that's why I went towards the gym route, because I started thinking like, okay, then how do I build this into a business? Right. And then it's like, show me one successful business that doesn't have employees, doesn't have systems, doesn't have some type of marketing, right? So those things all are there. And so I started realizing that, cool, if I want to build a business, I need those things. Right. Well, I have no clue how to do any of that stuff. And so that's why for me, part of it was out of laziness as well, but that's why I always sought out people like Bedros Koulian and Alex Hormozi. Like, who can I hire? Who can I spend some money on to learn these skill sets a little bit faster? Right? Because, I'm not naive enough to realize it's like, I know nothing about X, Y, and Z. So let me just find someone who's already doing and learn from them. So for example, Bedros paying the money and going to that mastermind, the Fitness Business Summit, that like broke all my beliefs around how do I get into an actual location? And it sped up that timeline. And so how did that happen? Well, I followed his advice. I got about 25 people training in a park. Start training them there, gave them really good service. I think that's what you have to always do as a coach, right? We have to take care of our people. So you do have to start off doing the grunt work, right? Took care of them for 6 weeks. Then at the end of those 6 weeks, sat down with each of them individually and told them my vision and told them like, hey, this is what I want to do. I have this location over here. They're willing to lease it out. I'm going to sell you. I'll give you a year membership for the cost of 6 months. And so from those 25 people, I'll never forget, man, it was crazy. Most money I ever collected, like in that short period of time in my life at that time, we had each of them give us almost, I think it was like $1,000 or $1,500 each. So it's like, so I had some revenue now to actually get into the location. And then with that, because now I was able to say, hey, I have clients, I have revenue, I have this, I was able to now go to my uncle and say, hey, can you front me $12K so I can get the rest of the mats and stuff for the gym. And so, this is kind of where I tell people, it's like, you don't necessarily need $152,000, $200,000 or $1 million loan or something like that to get your business started. You can bootstrap it. It's going to be a lot harder, right? But you can bootstrap it if you want to. So we were able to get into that location for less than $25,000. And now obviously, just so people, because obviously when we think bodybuilding, we're thinking of like big, like global gyms, things like that. So this was a 3,500 square foot, more like a CrossFit box, right? So we were kettlebells, TRX straps, there was no machines and stuff like that in there, right? You can't get a big 10,000 square foot location with machines for 25K.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you're good. I was gonna say, so then we started there, right? So that's the beginning of how I got into the location. And then that's where shit hit the fan, right? That's where I started realizing more and more of like, okay, now I'm not only just training my clients, I'm cleaning the toilets, I'm answering the phones, I'm doing the admin work. I'm trying, now we have a $5,000 a month bill, for just for rent, not including electricity and all that stuff. So that's where I started really kind of starting to understand. It's like, okay, now this is where, like you were saying, now I have to learn skill sets, right? How do I actually market? How do I sell? How do I build a team? All those things. And that's kind of where Alex Hermosi came in about 1.5 years later, after me kind of stumbling through and sucking at learning those skill sets. That's where I hired him and Gym Launch to kind of learn those skill sets and then grow from there.
Okay. Now, you did say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought you said earlier that you actually lived at the gym for a year and a half.
For quite a bit. Yeah. So I went through a very early divorce. So it's kind of your typical, I came back from the school to work, came back here in UNT, messed around, partied. Next, you find out you're having your first daughter. And then next, you're like, oh, we got to get married now. And so fast forward through that, we went through a very early divorce. Now it's worked out very well. We co-parent so well, man. And so when I didn't have my daughter, I had to make a decision of like, hey, am I going to pay my apartment rent? Or am I going to pay the gym rent? And so for me, it was like, okay, so the gym's going to be an asset. I'm going to grow it. I believe in it. I know it's going to make it. So I chose, okay, cool. I'm going to get evicted from my apartment, actually pay the gym rent. And then when I have my daughters, then cool, I'll go stay with my parents. So I spent about 6 months, so almost a year, just doing that, man. Like literally, we'd have the 5 a.m. class that would start in the morning, and then I'd be on the couch at 4 a.m. making sure I could wake up before the first person's knocking on the door. And so that was kind of, it was a hard period, but I definitely learned a lot from that.
Okay, so we're gonna kind of wrap up the business talk here, but I want you to kind of share with all of us who maybe aren't familiar with Alex Hermosi. Yeah. Talk about who he is, what he does. I mean, he's done a lot of different things. One of them, he wrote a book, which I have and read and got a lot of value out of it. But talk about how he maybe kind of helped you elevate as a business owner and kind of like unpack the rest of the history and story of your gym. Do you still have it? Kind of like, how has your business or businesses evolved? What are you doing at this point to make money?
Yeah, great question, Ben. So there's two things that I would say about Alex that I got from him. But first, let me give a little bit of people background on who this guy is, right? So first off, if you love business or fitness or anything like that, just go on YouTube, Alex Hermosi, and just start listening to his content. Like, you'll get some great value from it. But him and his wife started their business, Gym Launch, probably about 6-7 years ago. He started off as a gym owner in California, kind of had the same, kind of story as like a lot of us, fitness guys, right? Went to college, got a job, hated that job, and decided, I want to own a gym. So he, dropped everything, quit his job, moved over to California to mentor underneath someone to learn how to open up a gym. And next, he's owned 6 to 8 different gyms. He was able to sell, of those 8, I think he sold like 5 of them and shut down 3. And then that's where he started his company, Gym Launch, which was originally started out him just flying to people's different gyms and helping them market and sell. And then Gym Launch turned into what it is now, which is a business consulting program. Okay. And the 2 biggest things that I would definitely say that changed my life about Alex, I've been to his house and hung out with him and Layla multiple times. Like, 2 things that I could pick lessons that I would love to carry over and teach anyone here now would be, first one is, don't think of it as what business do I need to start to make money. Think of it as what skill sets do I need to learn, right? What skill sets do I need to learn to become better? And if you just invest in skill sets and invest in learning and stuff like that, you'll be surprised how fast you can move. Okay. So it's like skill sets first versus like thinking like, oh, I want to do this thing. Right. So that was one of the biggest things he taught me. And then second thing is going to be adjusting your timeline. And this is really important for bodybuilding. I mean, this is what has helped me out so much in the beginning here is, don't just think about what you're going to do next month or next year, right? Think about what the next decade looks like. And if you have that approach, it allows you to realize that you can accomplish a lot more than what you think, right? Because it's like, you can do a lot in a decade, man. It's hard to do a lot in a year, but you can do a lot in a decade. And so those would be like two life-changing things I'd say I got from him and his wife, Layla. And then to kind of wrap up the gym conversation. So I owned the gym for about 7 years. Ended up actually merging it with my buddy's sports performance facility in 2018. He didn't have an adult performance side, so we gave him, I gave him my staff, the systems, everything there, so that way I can kind of move on and do what I wanted to do, which was get into consulting for business. And then from there, it was kind of figuring out, like, I didn't know bodybuilding was going to be down the line, like how it is now, but I just knew there was something else I wanted to do besides kind of being attached to a brick and mortar location.
Awesome, man. Okay, so let's talk about the beginnings of bodybuilding. Now, the first question I want to kind of lead with, Josh, is, when were you first exposed to bodybuilding? Like, when did you first kind of see, being in the fitness industry, I'm sure you crossed paths with bodybuilders, but like, do you remember like the first IFBB pro that you came across, whether that was in person or magazine or YouTube? If so, who was it? And have you always been attracted to bodybuilding or drawn to bodybuilding, or is it something maybe just recently that has appealed to you?
Yeah, it's funny because it's one of those things where it kind of is full circle without you even knowing it, right? And so back in the day, my buddy who powerlifted here with me my senior year of high school, and he actually came to college with me at Aurora for a little bit. He was very into it. He was very into bodybuilding and things like that. And I was just like, oh man, that's kind of weird. I don't want to stand on stage and do that, blah, blah, blah. I like to train, but that's, I'm good on that. But, it was definitely something that got brought up and definitely something that caught my attention. I was like, oh, maybe one day I'll prep for a show. And then, life happens, you start coaching, you open up the business, things like that. And then you just never think about it again. And so once I got out of the gym, that's where I started actually training at Destination Dallas. I was like, I'm going to start, really kind of getting into this, start training again. And so I went to Destination Dallas, and that was the first time I ever saw any pros, right? So Hunter Labrada was one of them. Branch Warren trains there, of course. And so I'm just like in this environment, I was like, whoa, this is different. This is very cool. And so this was about 2 years ago. This is October 2020 is when I started. So kind of during the whole pandemic stuff. And that's where kind of the whole like serious journey of like, I'm going to start bodybuilding. That's where that started. Okay.
Now, your coach is Luke Miller. He's somebody that I just within the last month had on the podcast. Very, very knowledgeable, individual, very cool dude. Now, how soon after you started training at Destination did you connect with Luke? And then why don't you kind of start unpacking this whole experience of bodybuilding that you've had up to this point? Now, this show that you're 10 days out from, is this going to be your first time on a competitive bodybuilding stage?
Yeah, first time.
Cool. Okay. So when did you connect with Luke, and then kind of walk us through the last couple of years in terms of, what it's taken, what you've learned with respect to bodybuilding up to being 10 days out from your first competition?
Yeah, man, I feel like it's been such a long journey, which has been so much fun, right? Even though it's been short 2 years. But so I actually started, because I have to give credit where credit is due. Nick Bagley, long haul performance. He trains over, he's a coach at Destination Dallas. So actually, when I first got to Destination Dallas, I got a message from him, just checking in and say, hey, I just saw you join the gym. Let me know if you need anything. So I actually started training with him first. Right. And so he definitely got me up off the ground running. With him, we kind of started, looking at my physique back then. I started with him, I was 185. You looked at me, you're like, this guy's not a bodybuilder. So the original plan was, cool, we're going to, start training, and then we'll see where things go. And then if we get serious about it, then we'll train for like a class of physique show. Okay. And so started with him. We started with like a little bit of initial cut first, right? Get some of that baby fat off. And then we started growing from there, got up to about 200 and something. And then that's where I started connecting with Luke a little bit more. I love Nick. Nick's an awesome coach. He's amazing at what he does. But for me, my physique started changing so fast, and I started realizing how much I love this. And I was like, you know what, man, like this is the whole thing, like Alex taught me, right? The 10-year journey. I was like, I want to be on the Olympia stage. I want to do this for the next decade. And so with that comes a conversation like PED usage. There's a lot more that you have to go into, right, from a risk standpoint. And, there's just something that connected me with Luke. At first it was because we were doing a church group together. And so we were obviously having conversations about bodybuilding and stuff too, right? We were always laughing like Jesus and bodybuilding. It was like, this is what it was about. And so I just gravitated towards him. Right. And it was nothing against Nick, but it was just more so of like, I felt really called that Luke really understood my situation. Obviously you've met Luke before. He's a very knowledgeable guy. He's been mentored by John Jewett, things like that. And so I just really loved his approach to everything with, pulling blood work, really assessing things. And so I started with Luke about 6 months into the journey. So about a year and a half ago. Okay. And then from there, Luke looked at me and said, no, we're not going to do classic physique. Let's grow. Right. Like, let's just spend time growing. Let's not worry about a show. Let's not do anything. And so we spent about a year just growing, got up to about 270 pounds, which was crazy, which is the heaviest I've ever been in my life. Right. And then we got to the point where like, okay, cool. We've proven that we can take this serious. It's like, let's pick a show to prep for. And it's been rough, but we've done a 34-week prep coming into the Texas Cup.
Wow. Okay. Now training wise, and by the way, Nick Bagley was on my other podcast before I kind of transitioned into Behind the Muscle. So I've had a conversation with him, super cool guy as well. Being down in Destination Dallas, the name, it's destination, like it's literally a destination for bodybuilders, bodybuilding, like all the things. So I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better starting point in terms of a gym, right?
Yep.
Now, so training, how did you kind of start training with Nick? And then how has your training evolved as you've spent more time with Luke, and what does your training kind of current day look like, Josh?
Yeah, so they're both actually not too far off when it comes to training philosophies, right? But it drastically, I think one of the reasons why my physique changed so fast is because of how they approach training, the whole top set, back set thing. Not sure if you're familiar with it, but top sets, back off sets, it was a concept I've never even heard of before. And so for them, it was always going to be a little bit more on the lower volume side, higher load, right? Going to fail on those top set, back off sets, obviously having your warm-up sets beforehand. And so that was a training style Nick got me exposed to, and that's a training style that Luke is too. Now, where Luke has definitely pushed me a lot more is if anyone's familiar with John Jewett and kind of his training style as well, right? It's very, very specific, right? So like, for example, I never even knew I wasn't training my lats. I thought I was training my lats, but I wasn't training my lats. And so, we corrected a lot of those things of really doing what, Luke calls a needs analysis and saying, okay, hey, based on your physique right now, here are the muscle groups that we really need to focus on. And like, let's examine how are you training those groups right now? What do the lifts look like? And then we were able to kind of really adjust those and fix the form on everything. Mm-hmm. So you combine that with the intensity that in the effort from like the top set, back off set type training philosophy, with making sure forms, pretty much damn near perfect until you fail. That's been kind of the training style over the last 2 years.
What do you feel like up to this point, just having basically your first 2 years within bodybuilding has just been preparation, training, eating, kind of just preparing for the competition that you're 10 days out from. Up to this point, what's kind of been the most challenging or difficult aspect of this bodybuilding lifestyle that you've stepped into and adopted?
Man, first thing I want to point out is because you said something there I love so much about bodybuilding is the fact that we'll prepare for 2 years for something that's going to take 30 minutes on stage combined, right? And so I think that's my favorite part about the sport, right? It's like it's preparation more than anything, which carries over into life in so many different ways. Now the biggest thing that I would say that like has been a struggle for me that's new for me is definitely nutrition. And not from obviously, coming from a coaching background and stuff like that, I was always, decent with nutrition. But for me, I always had the physique where it's like, I could still eat whatever I wanted. Right. So it's like, so before I started prep or before I started working with Luke, even in the off season, the longest I went without eating out was probably like 3 days. And if you're familiar with Luke, 34 weeks, there is no eating out. Like there is no, so it's like, so it's not necessarily the discipline around it, but it's just like getting used to understanding. It's like, I grew up where it's like food was a huge aspect of the family time. Food was, just if you went out for food and drinks. If I grew up partying a lot, right, in college. So it's like everything was around food, drinking, things like that. And so adjusting that relationship, adjusting that mindset has definitely been one of the most challenging components. because the work, man, the cardio, the training, all that stuff. I'm a workhorse. So it's like, I don't mind that stuff at all. So for me, the challenging but most fun part has been adjusting my relationship with food.
Great. Okay. So from the onset with Luke, when you guys kind of connected and you're like, hey, we're going to put our eyes on this competition that you're 10 days out from, what's the immediate goal for you, Josh, in terms of what are you trying to accomplish at your first competition? And then what's that longer vision or that longer goal that you and Luke have in terms of, 3 years, 5 years, even 10 years, as you spoke about previously?
Yeah, I love this question, man. So obviously immediate goal, we're always thinking like, hey, we want the win, right? Like, let's get it overall, let's win the show. But to be honest with you, man, it's like this show has always been for us, like even before we even started prep, was like, this is going to be a stepping stone to something different. And so Luke's used the analogy, like you have your varsity high school basketball players, right? And that's probably one of the few sports where you have the option to skip college and go to the NBA if you're good enough. And so that's what our goal is, right? That's what we're trying to do here, right? We're not trying to do a ton of amateur shows and things like that. It's like we want to do one heavy prep, right? Let's see where we're at from a physique standpoint. And, and we never would have guessed that I was going to be stepping on stage at 240 for my first show, and really, and pretty decent conditioning, right? Boxed out glutes, conditioning is really solid from the front. So it's like, so to know that we were able to put on that much tissue and keep it has been really cool for us to see. And so with that being said, originally we were thinking about doing nationals this year, but again, the goal was, how do we go from high school varsity to pro, right? And so we're going to pull it from there. We already have all of 2023 mapped out for off season. We're going to spend 2023 really growing, put on as much quality tissue as we need in the areas that we've kind of realized, hey, this is what we need some tissue at. And then the goal is to come back in 2024 and be able to step on stage, win an overall at a national show, and then go compete at the pro level from there. But the thing that I would say is, like, from the very beginning with Luke, which is why him and I vibe so well, is we've never really set these goals of like, let's win this local show or let's get the pro card. It's always been the main thing we're concerned about is like, how do we build a pro physique? And that's where it's been more fun, because it's just like, that's all we care about. Like, that's all we're working on. It's like, hey, how do we build a physique that can stand on a BS stage one day?
Excellent, man. Okay. I want to go back to something, Josh, that you were, that you brought up and you touched on, kind of like when you were in high school. You said that, you kind of tried to act this way, and then you were trying to act this way. And I think most of us, for generally speaking, we have to walk through, we have to try different things, at different stages in life, just as we search out who we're going to be. Or do I believe what my parents told me? Do I believe, what the teachers told me? Like, there's this process that most of us go through. So I want to bring back up the word identity, because I personally believe in life, who you view yourself as, that's how other people are going to view you. That's how you're going to show up each day, and the way that you talk to yourself, the way that you think, that's what's going to be manifested in your life and all around you. So going back to that word identity that you kind of alluded to or mentioned, that you were kind of like going back and forth, trying different things in high school. I guess I want to ask you, like, who are you now? Has bodybuilding over the last couple of years maybe given you a new identity? Talk to me a little bit about finding who you are, what you are, because I'm kind of fascinated to kind of, bring us from teenager Josh up to dad Josh, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I love this question, because it's, especially having kids now, right? I have two daughters, 8 and 7. And so it's something that I think about a lot. It's like, what can I teach them? What can I steal in them and stuff like that? And like, this is such a big question, because like, you're right. It's like, what you believe is what's going to dictate how you act, right? And how you act is going to dictate your results. So like, but just start with that belief. And I'm a Christian. So it's like, for me, having, going through a lot of points where I hit rock bottom, mostly because of my own dumb decisions, was really helpful to guide me to a place where it's like, I knew man, okay, I need something a little bit better than myself, right? Like, I just can't do this by myself. And so that's kind of where my relationship with Christ started. And, you know, obviously it's a journey, you know, no one's perfect, but it's like at the root of it, it's like, that's where I would say my identity lies. But the reason I bring that up is because, you know, even this week I was listening to a sermon and I loved how it talked about is like, God doesn't care about what you do. He cares about who you are. And so now when I'm looking at identity, I kind of take the pressure off of trying to wrap my identity around, you know, my job, what I do there for work. I try not to wrap it around like even bodybuilding, right? Like bodybuilding's life, right? Because let's be real, it's not life. It's going to last for, you know, a decade, hopefully more. And then there needs to be stuff else as well, right? Or even just parenting, right? You know, like I can't just say I'm only a parent, right? Because like there's so much more to that too. And so for me now, when I think of identity, I try and focus more on characteristics, and I try and focus more on really just that character, right? So it's like, you know, and that's where for me, obviously, you know, I lean towards my, you know, Christianity, lean towards the Bible, and like, hey, what characteristics do I want to embody? And that's kind of how I try and live and wrap my identity around those things. And I love that thought process because then it's like, I can bring that into my work at Gym Launch. I can bring that into bodybuilding, how I approach bodybuilding from, hey, if I'm going to say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be disciplined. I'm going to be focused, right? I'm going to be, you know, as productive as possible. So I try and take that approach. And like now, then I just apply it to everything I do.
Awesome. Okay. Now I want to talk about faith for a minute, because that's something that's very foundational in my life as well. Now was Christianity something that you were exposed to as a child? Was that something that you were taught, you know, growing up in your home, or is that something that came across your path, you know, later on in life?
Yeah, for my people who have read the Bible, you're probably familiar with like the prodigal son, right? You know, the guy who leaves home, comes back, right, gets accepted. I feel like that's my journey. So, because we did, you know, I grew up, you know, my parents, you know, we went to church. It was non-denominational church, but it was more like a Baptist church. So it was very old school, man. I mean, you had the men and women were separated on each side. And as a kid going into that environment, it was terrible, man. So it just made me just like, why are we doing this? Why are we going every Sunday? I don't want to go. So it kind of turned me a little bit away. And then obviously growing up, I was more focused on, you know, partying, getting in trouble, things like that, to where that kind of turned me away as well. And the next thing you know, I'm 23, having my first daughter, and kind of looking at my life and, you know, and like I said, going through that early divorce and kind of looking at my life and realizing it's like, man, that's where I had to ask myself the question of like, you know, who do I want to be? Like, who am I going to be? And that's what kind of really started me building that relationship in Christ and really starting to kind of understand what it means to actually follow that versus just think, oh, I'm a Christian.
Right. And just I want to just touch on this really quick, because, you know, my story is very similar. I almost got kicked out of college for partying. You know, I grew up going to church, all that stuff, youth group and everything, was exposed to that at a very young age. But this is something that I feel like, and I know there's going to be somebody watching this, somebody's going to be listening to this, and, you know, God's going to be speaking through you and myself to them, because that's how God works. He uses people to reach people. He uses people's testimonies and people's stories to touch other people's lives. Right. But the thing is, you know, I guess the thing that I really want to touch on, you know, is the fact that what I kind of said earlier, like we all have to, we have to find out on our own, like, you know, these things that I was exposed to as a youth, again, through our parents, through coaches, through teachers. And I'm specifically referring right now to faith, because this is something I had to experience myself. And I've talked to a lot of people that have walked away from faith and have come back to faith, right? This faith that a lot of us are exposed to as youth, at some point we have to determine and make the decision for ourselves as adults. Is this faith something that I want? Is this something that I believe in? Or is this just something kind of along the lines of other things that my parents or adults taught me growing up that I'm just going to leave behind? And I think that's very important, especially maybe if a parent is listening to this because I've talked to parents and they're just like, they're praying for their prodigal sons and their prodigal daughters. And it's really hard. I'm not a parent of my own, but I can only imagine it's got to be very hard, for parents to see their kids that, they raise them up in the church and stuff and see them walk away. It's got to be heartbreaking. Right. So I've heard these parents talking, and I've had a conversation with people just saying, like, you just got to realize that sometimes, like, you got to let your kids go, and they've got to explore. They've got to kind of figure things out on their own, especially when it comes to faith. And we know that as you have praying parents, like God is going to be drawing that child, those kids, to himself. Like, he's a jealous God. He's a zealous God. The Holy Spirit is going to be drawing and all of that. So we've just got to realize that, especially as youth, like, they've got to explore. We've got to search. And that faith has to become ours at some point. Otherwise it's just another thing. Right. So, I just wanted to kind of expound on that for myself personally, because I have a similar story. And I know that it's really hard for a lot of parents to kind of see their kids maybe going through those exploration times, but just know that God is faithful, and he is drawing your kid or your kids to himself. And we all have that choice to come to Jesus or not at the end of the day. And I'm thankful that God gives us that choice, because that's what true love is. True love is allowing somebody to choose. Like, I love you. If it's forced, that's not real love. That's not true love. Right, Josh?
Amen to that, dude. Amen to that. And I think just, for someone who might be listening and be like, man, this just took a very faith turn here. This applies to everything in life, man, because it's like, you have to be able to make your mistakes, mess up, and be humble enough to realize that you're not enough in order to get better at anything. Right. So it's like, let's just say maybe it's not Christianity. Let's just take bodybuilding, for example, right? Like, you have to be willing to be able to say, yo, I'm not good enough here. Let me hire this coach, or let me follow this, or let me learn this. Right. So it's like, you're right, man. It's a personal journey, and you got to be willing to, you got to kind of fall, hit your head and things like that before you can get back up.
Okay. So one of the last things I want to touch on here, Josh, before I let you go, your Instagram is the Bodybuilding Dad, or that's kind of like your name on Instagram. So talk about fatherhood, talk about, the decision to kind of pursue this bodybuilding, vision and dream for yourself. Because that, as you've mentioned, as we know, that's I'm not going to say necessarily a selfish endeavor, but it's a very consuming endeavor, bodybuilding, right? It's an adopted lifestyle. So talk about thinking about, like, okay, I'm a dad, I'm a family man. How can I work this bodybuilding thing? And so kind of tie those two things together, please.
Yeah, this is great, man. I think this actually ties in like this conversation too, right? If anyone can take anything from this, is like, the foundation you've built can really allow you to be successful in bodybuilding. And I think one of the benefits for me starting bodybuilding at 28 versus like a lot of people who start, let's be real, like, right in high school or things like that, is that I was able to go through this period of time in life where it was like a lot of like failing, learning, having some success, right? Those type of things, like building a foundation before actually hopping into bodybuilding. And so with that being said, the reason why I don't think it's felt like it's been a selfish sport too much is because, my daughters grew up with me in the business, right? They were 1 and 2 when I first started the gym. They've always been around me as I've been going through personal development and things like that with entrepreneurship. My current fiance now, she was my ops manager for my gym. So we went through some crap together, right? And so, I mean, you've ran a gym before, so it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And so it's like, so just all of that really prepared us for being able to really handle bodybuilding. And it's so cool because it's like, I've just been blessed with beautiful, amazing daughters, man. But it's like, my daughters know, they know, okay, we got to win this regional show to get to a national show. Then we're going to do a national show. We're going to win that pro card. Then we're going to step on a pro stage. We're going to win a pro stage, and we're going to go to Olympia stage. Like, they know the journey. They know the goals. And so I think one thing I love to talk to people about when it comes to kids, I don't care how young they are, if you start to trust them and show them, hey, I'm your dad, yes, but here are my personal goals. Here's what I'm aiming for in life. And I want you to be my cheerleader and support me. You'd be surprised how fast your kids can pick up and be mature about those things. And so, so that has helped a ton, especially as we get deeper into prep, because now I have my children who are not just rooting for me, but they also understand, right? Like they also understand that, you know, obviously they don't understand what it feels like to go through prep, but like we have this little chart on the fridge where it's like a frowny face, a smiley face, and then just a neutral face. And we kind of use that for like, hey, this is where dad's at today in prep. And so it's like, so it's been really cool because yeah, I can, you know, a lot of people say bodybuilding is selfish, but it's like, if you just communicate and involve the people around you in it, it really becomes something that's actually not selfish, because it's like everyone's a part of the journey. It's like having a team around you. So I would just say, like, for people who are parents and you're bodybuilding, it's like, you have to figure out how can you get them involved in a way where it's like, hey, this is a team effort. This isn't just something dad's doing by himself.
All right. Awesome. We've gone for almost 60 minutes here, Josh. I think we kind of touched on a lot of topics, man, had a very thorough conversation. So I just want to say thank you for coming on, you know, just sharing your life story with us, your bodybuilding story, man. It's always fun listening to athletes, listening to the coaches that come on, kind of just, again, getting behind the scenes, getting behind the business, getting behind the muscle. So thank you so much, Josh. Before I do a quick outro and I let you go, I want to give you the opportunity to, you know, share any final thoughts, any final words that you might want to leave with all of us, any shout outs, you know, website, Instagram, anything in terms of kind of like, you know, us connecting with you. Platform's yours. I'll do a quick outro and then I'll let you go. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, man. First off, I appreciate you having me on. This has been really fun. And, you know, really just like shout outs, just thank yous. Definitely my fiance, my daughters, and my coach, man. Like, you know, people that have just been in my corner. If anyone's looking for a great coach or anything like that, look up No Switch Fitness on Instagram, follow stuff. He's a ton of content there that can help. And then give me a follow there. And then, you know, follow me on YouTube as well. Just my name, Josh Ponton. Reason I say that is because coming at this from being super fresh, and then kind of having the business experience that I do. One of my passions now is like other people who are emerging in the sport. How can I provide a platform, not to coach people, but how can I provide a platform to show you like, hey, here's everything from the start, right? Like from, you know, very beginning to hopefully, you know, in the next few years, stepping on Olympia stage. You know, I want to definitely document this journey with Luke and just, you know, we're not holding anything back. So, you know, follow us along on the journey, guys, and really just appreciate the support.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. Really appreciate your time. Okay.
Awesome. No worries, man. Appreciate you.
All right. Yep. All right. All of you who are tuning in to another episode of Behind the Muscle podcast, I just want to say thank you so very much. I appreciate all of you. I value all of you. And as I always say, if it weren't for all of you, the podcast simply would not exist. So thank you so much for all your continued support. If you have not done so already, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube. That's really important because I release all of these episodes first on YouTube, and then I'll distribute them to iTunes, CastBox, Podbean, and some of the other major podcast platforms. So if you want to stay up current on all the BTM episodes, make sure you are subscribed to us on YouTube. And then also, please take this episode of Josh, share it on your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag Josh, tag Behind the Muscle, so that we know that you listened specifically to this episode and found great value in it, in which I know you did. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.